Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody. Glad that you could join me tonight. This is a very special night because not only is it on a topic that I am a part of and fascinated by, but it's with an old friend because J D DeBorg has been with us a couple of times and we've talked about dreams and we've talked about a lot of these topics as well during those interviews. But this book is special and Jason is as well. He's the most trusted name in dream interpretations out there. He's the author of 4 groundbreaking books about dreams, including a bestseller dream dictionary, and he's the leader of the largest online dream sharing site since 2013 and a dynamic teacher of dream interpretation and analysis. What he's tried to do and done brilliantly, I have to say, is to put out material out there that tries to explain what can't be explained. He's tried to take something that is etheric and apply scientific proof to it and in many cases he's succeeded. This book helps us to discover the truth behind ESP, paranormal powers, and psychic abilities. It's a perfect gift for the curious minds and bold scientists alike. It goes into some paranormal phenomena and powers of the mind that are real, but mainstream science dismisses it as fantasy. The science of the paranormal looks toward the overwhelming evidence that something weird and wild lies beyond our everyday reality, which is the coolest part, and it's really there. Credible witnesses have seen paranormal activity with their own eyes. Scientists have studied it in their labs, and every day we see depictions of its popular media like Stranger Things and X-Men. The book separates fact from fiction in this book, fiction, not fission, and gets answers to some questions like, can objects be moved with psychokinesis? Is the future foreseeable? Can we communicate telepathically? What does science say about ESP? Where is the evidence for reincarnation and spirits and much, much more? It's a topic that I've had difficulty explaining to people when I say I just know, or yeah, isn't that neat? It really did happen, or do remote viewing. I mean, there's so much in this area that while not scientifically provable, can't be denied either. And certain aspects of it that we'll get into, scientists are having a harder and harder time explaining some of these things. So welcome to the show, Jason. It's good to have you back.
It's great to be back, Barbara. I too have been looking forward to this because I know that you go through every word of the books that you cover for your program, and you ask great questions because you know the material. And this one, especially the science of the paranormal, this is like right up your alley. So,
you're right in my ballpark.
Yeah, you're in your wheelhouse. Yes.
Oh, I am. I definitely am. And a lot of the material that you go through, I've interviewed authors on these topics, and so it's an area that is very near and dear to my heart, because um, psychics or empaths or spiritualists, whatever you want to call them, have been attacked for generations as being frauds and fakes. And while there are frauds and fakes out there, that there are frauds fakes out there in every profession. So it shouldn't be a surprise to a lot of people that when you don't understand something, you say it's got to be a fake or illegal or whatever. But you've gone into some of the areas that I function in, and it was fascinating. What brought you to the it's an incredible topic to have to write about and stick to scientific proof.
This originated with the publisher Skyhorse, and they have a series that's the science of, and they came up to the science of the paranormal, and they went out looking for someone, an author who could cover the material. And this behind the scenes of publishing, it goes to an editor at the publisher, goes to agents or an agent, in my case Lisa Hagen, and went to her and said, do you have any authors who would be interested, who could take on this kind of material and be interested in writing a book for us? And she calls me up, and Lisa, my agent, did, and said, hey, this looks like it would be right up your alley. What do you think? And she pitched it to me, and I said, oh, heck yeah. Are you kidding? It felt like, like some kind of synchronicity at work, something bigger, because these are subjects that have fascinated me going way back. And I had dug into the science of it as opposed to the experiential side of it. Like when you experience precognition or telepathy, you don't, and it to be true. Like you don't have these questions, oh, is this real or not? You
Yeah,
don't need the science to tell you what you already know through your own experience. But I find, in at least with people who have a background in this stuff, I took political science in college, and I learned the scientific method and all the ways that it applied to, the various up to, a certain level. I'm not an advanced scientist, and a lot of people would argue that political science isn't actually a science.
yeah,
Um, but um, I I wanted to bring what I have experienced, not just what I've experienced, but what I've seen published, and to bring this subject to people who aren't convinced by experience because they haven't had it, or the stories they've heard from people close to them weren't convincing. Like when Bob Snow was on your program, he talked about, he didn't come around about reincarnation until it was just, absolutely slapping him upside the head like this is proof. Bob Snow was the detective who investigated his own death, essentially, his past life. He thought it was all a joke, there was nothing to it. And then he had the experience himself. And it took a long time for him to realize, after incontrovertible proof, that is the reincarnation of Carol Beckwith, this
yeah,
obscure artist from more than a century ago, that until he could accept it as being fact, even when it was hit him upside the head, he still needed more evidence. I mean, he was
oh
a
yeah,
police detective, he needs evidence. But I find this in discussions with people about this subject is that they want the proof. You know, I was just talking with my wife earlier tonight, and I said, you do realize that disclosure of, some kind of UFO presence it has happened.
yeah,
She's like, well, I'll believe it when they land on the White House lawn, kind of thing, which a lot of people say, it's like, I'll see it when I'll believe it when I see it for myself. And I'm like, well, it actually has been disclosed. Pentagon, up to the level of Pentagon spokesperson, has confirmed that this is happening, has happened, and continues to happen.
yeah,
And they gave a press conference where they disclosed it. And it's just funny to me that more people don't know that. In the same sort of way, the science of the paranormal, many of these areas have been proven. We mentioned things like telepathy, ESP, reincarnation. These are things that have been studied uh, at an academic level. There is published research about it. The published research has come up with the statistical power to say that these things there's a very high likelihood that these things actually exist because they have been captured through research and experimental science. And the data says that it's there, and it meets the bar for acceptance in the scientific community, but the scientific community refuses to give it seal of approval. So this has become a roadblock, because if you are the person on the other side of this who's like in the public, who's looking, who wants to know, well, is anything about the paranormal real? Are there psychic powers or abilities or whatever? Is this true, or is this just people wishful thinking or misinterpretation or whatever? Those people don't know what the science says, because the gatekeepers are standing in the middle. Anytime something comes out that says, yes, the science is good, it's there, and the gatekeepers say, no, it's not. So the person who's on this side of it, all they hear is, no, it's not. They
Yeah.
don't get to the research. So what I did in my book is I traced the research going all the way back 150 years. We've had Nobel Prize winners, department heads,
Oh, yeah.
division heads. A lot of people don't know about the University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies. These are top flight academics and scientists who are doing this research and publishing, and they've they've been doing this for decades. And what they've put out is convincing, and not just convincing from somebody like with a science background who can read through the studies and say, wow, these guys are good experimental design replicated by other labs. But it's also in the numbers and in the data. When you run the data and you say, what are the odds against chance that this is just a fluke? This thing demonstrated telepathy in the lab. Is it just a fluke? Because those things happen. Well,
Sure.
it's not a fluke when, 100 different labs reproduce this, and you put all of that data together and you run the numbers where you can say, what are the odds against chance? Some of these experiments have come up with odds against chance that go 1 in sextillion odds that it was a fluke. Now, is all of it great science? No. You mentioned, there are frauds out there. There's bad science. There's people who want to believe and all that. But I went through all that, and as the author, and I came away absolutely convinced.
Well, look at even the physicians and surgeons who have had near-death experiences, and with their background, with their knowledge, with their whatever, being clinically dead, and suddenly, I mean, a number of them have written books on it, that it really happened, and here I am with my background, and I was clinically dead, and they have all of that material that they can prove that there was somewhere they went. um, they're still, they don't have the kind of validation that you would think they would get because it's their field. And it blows me away, because so much, um, you said somewhere that you can't take something that is etheric and put it through a scientific experiment and expect to get the same kind of physical results that that come from a spiritual, paranormal consciousness. It's consciousness that is the stumbling block here, because they can't prove consciousness.
And they've been trying for an awful long
Yeah.
time. In fact, at a recent conference, there was a couple of neuroscientists who'd made a bet 25 years ago, and the bet was, I bet that in 25 years, that we will not have a proved uh, theory of consciousness that's in a materialist paradigm. And 25 years later, the guy who bet against him paid up with like a expensive bottle of like,
Yeah.
Chateau de Rothschild wine or something like that. Um, and this is when yeah, that's one of the areas that are, that you can look into and see that the research is is very clear about what sometimes, and it's about what it doesn't prove. We've had 50 years of hard neuroscience trying to find consciousness in the brain, trying to
Not there.
define consciousness under the materialist paradigm, and they haven't been able to do that. And in fact, there are now around 300 different theories of consciousness within that realm of neuroscience, neurology. And over half of them, or around half of them now, are based in non-material sources for consciousness. So, but
Yeah.
this was a big change because 50 years ago, people weren't even, you would be laughed out of the room if you tried to say that consciousness was anything other than brain function. And you mentioned the near death experiences too. A lot of people don't realize that medicine has a specialty, resuscitation, that has its own high level journals, has its own high level people from various medical institutions. And you mentioned near death experiences. This is something that they have had to grapple with. It's taken them 40 years since Raymond Moody and Bruce Grayson and people like that, physicians, research scientists who put forth their books and research and published papers and stuff. The resuscitation journals have had to grapple with this because this is part of medical science. This is something they are encountering all the time. There's over 750 resuscitations per day. And I think the numbers was about 40% of those resuscitations, people come back with some sense that they were still alive, even though their body was dead. In
Yeah.
some cases, their body had been dead for so long that there was no way that there could be any working memory or brain function or anything to produce the experience of consciousness. Because if consciousness really is a function of the brain and maybe the nervous system by extension, um, exclusively, I'm not saying they don't have anything to do with it, but if it was exclusively, like when the brain dies, consciousness dies with it. Well, that has been proven not to be true because the
Yeah.
and in published journals, there was a study in 2023, and I cited in the book. I think you saw there's over 200 citations or something like
Yeah.
that in my book. So I give you where I found these sources. The Resuscitation Journal in 2023 had a study with over 2 dozen co-authors. And when I looked up these people, these are, this isn't people just putting their name on a piece of paper and slapping it out there as research. These
Yeah.
were people with academic credentials who work in top flight medical institutions. They had them all come together and they wanted to say, are near death experiences any of these things that are used to write them off as some kind of hallucination, dream, drug induced, medical trauma induced, those kinds of things. They went through the list, every one of them, and they said, absolutely not. We
Oh,
can't tell you what it exactly is, except what it appears to be is that there is a reality. Now, this is in published research. They said that there is a reality that is beyond our physical world. And when you die, you have direct access to it. Like this is they said, we don't know for sure, but this is what we think it is based off of our research. These it was over 2 dozen medical institutions across the world who monitored their near death experiences and got to those people as quickly as they could. Like as soon as they were capable, like, hey, we're doing a study on near death experience. Would you mind talking about what,
yeah.
giving us being part of our research? And the and so it's not just that. So the research is there and it's absolutely proven. There is no doubt about it. It's like the UFO disclosure. It has happened. So don't go back to try moving the bar back to over here that says,
Yeah.
well, are UFOs real? Is there really these high-tech craft flying around in our skies? Do people have near-death experiences? Is it something other than hallucination or dream or drug induced? And the answer in that case was absolutely yes. So we can't move the bar back to our near death experience is a real phenomenon because it has been proven. It's just that, Barbara, I mean, I'm fascinated in this subject. I wrote a book about near death experiences and I hadn't seen that research yet.
Well,
I
I
ghost
know.
wrote it. That's why you don't see my name on it. But I ghost wrote a book about near death experiences, and I had to dig into all the research because it was from the research side of it. It's absolutely convincing, and yet most people because I bring these subjects up over dinner or something, and most people have no idea that this research is out there.
I think also the other thing about it that 12 years ago, Patrick, my late husband, and I did a series of 3 2-hour interviews on near-death experiences.
Mhm.
And I found that every single person that we talked to, not only their stories were very convincing, but it changed their lives so that they were more spiritually focused, that they were more helping humanity focused, that there was a shift in, pardon the term, consciousness that that went on. It's almost like a door opened when they had that experience, and that they had access to a greater wisdom of spiritual existence, and therefore it changed the way that they lived their lives. Now, I'm not saying everybody was, had a metamorphosis, but almost, I would say 90% of them came back with a different perception of life and what the purpose of life was.
And the ones who don't come back with that tend to be people who didn't actually have a near-death experience. They've conflated having something where they had a brush with death
Yeah.
with a near-death experience. And there's something called the Grayson scale after Bruce Grayson, who was one of the pioneering physicians who, wrote a lot of books and published research on this. He came up with a scale that says, does this qualify as a near-death experience? And when you look at the people who are reporting things that are not spiritually transformative, that did not take away their fear of death, those are not near death experiences. Those are medical crisis where a person came close to death or maybe flatlined and was resuscitated. Um, which, by the way, there are cases in the near death literature. People say, well, maybe the brain is still active. They could be dead for 5 minutes and resuscitated. And I go, okay, well, let's talk about Mary Neal, who was the surgeon who got caught underwater for over half an hour while she was on a
Yes.
kayaking trip. She was at a powerful waterfall was holding her under, and she died under the water, and then her spiritual body just went and witnessed the scene, and she was able to report what people were talking about, what was going on during the resuscitation. This has been in other cases too, where there was absolutely some sort of awareness of oneself as alive, and not just alive, but vibrantly alive.
Yes.
It was
Yes.
like they were contained in this little tiny thing called a body, and just all of a sudden, boom. And now they're part of the larger reality, and it is spectacular. And most of them do not want to come back, even
Oh,
if they have good lives, good homes, good families, lots of love, lots of reasons to live. No, they know all those people back on earth are going to be fine. I've got things to do. I had no idea that the afterlife was this spectacular,
yeah.
and they are ready to go. And some of them have to come back to broken bodies, like Jeff Olson, who made that decision because he had his child back on earth. His wife met him at the portal. She died in the car accident, and his other child died, but one of them lived. And his wife came to him at the portal to the other side and said, Jeff, you've got to stay. You got to stay because we've got a son who needs you. And Jeff came back and ended up having both of his legs amputated, like at the knees, punctured lungs, broken
Oh,
body,
yeah.
just absolutely crushed. He had to go through a year before he even got out of the hospital. So there are those cases. And then there are the ones where, you know, there are a lot of people who said they didn't want to come back, but they got to the very end of the threshold and something told them it's not your time. You still got things to
Yeah.
do.
You have something to do.
And this was another one of those big questions, that we ask, is there life after death? Are there UFOs? Are UFOs real? Is there life after death? And is there a God? And the only one of those three that I haven't been able to prove, I don't think has been proven is there a God? Because even though people have a near death experience where they encounter some kind of a being that's like that, they tend to run according to their cultural ideas and religious ideas about what, at least initially, about what the afterlife is and what God is. And it's like a feedback loop. And so for that reason, I don't think that we can prove anything beyond a certain point, because we haven't resuscitated anyone who had been dead for, say, months. We've only caught them at the beginning of the crossing over process. I mean, the longest that I ran across was a person had been dead for about an hour when they were resuscitated, and
What
they
about
reported a
Lazarus?
near-death experience. Like Lazarus in the Bible, you got to imagine, he was dead for what, three or 4 days before he was
He was gone
resurrected.
a couple days. Yeah.
So, it would make you wonder what unfortunately, we weren't able to ask him how far into the afterlife he went. You know, I mean,
Well,
the
yeah.
reason why I joke about this is because I think, Barbara, that there could be this thing when you first cross over that the very best, wisest teachers have access to you because you've just been through this profoundly transformative experience, and they get to you and they want you to know, they want you to see, yes, the universe is this big loving thing, it's all created by God, and we're all connected, and this and that and this and that. And then you cross to that final threshold where there's no coming back, and then maybe at that point you find out that it's not quite what, like there's other ways of looking at it,
Yes.
you know and because on a lot of these near death experiences, you find that there were levels of the afterlife that are complete projections of your own beliefs. It's very dreamlike, in fact, in the sense that it operates where you get to have an immersive sensory visual experience um, that is fed back to you based off of your expectations and beliefs, which is that's what the subconscious does with you when you're dreaming, which makes you wonder, is dreaming actually preparing us for that final transition into the afterlife by giving us a taste of what it's like to step into a reality that is not physical? Like
Yeah.
when we get to the spiritual reality, we get to a reality that's not physical, but it feeds back to us our beliefs and expectations, our emotions, things like that. um, but I got sidetracked because I've been waiting to tell someone that, because I couldn't work it into the book. um,
Well,
this
I
insight that we don't know, we can't prove God from near
yeah.
death experiences, but we can prove some of these other things. And I think that's so exciting. And it just boggles the mind that most of the public is not caught up to this yet.
Well,
It,
I tell people all the time that we create our reality by our perception of it. And I would think that the same would be true, that as we cross over, our perception of what the other side is sort of what we expect as well. And one of the gifts that I have is that I'm able to see people right after they cross over. And in many cases, it's very different. They haven't actually gotten to the point where they are being processed, so to speak. And my favorite is a friend of Jeannie's, my best friend. She took care of this lady in a nursing home, and she was she was a crazy lady. She was just as loose a person as could possibly be. And she didn't have what you would call the best of lives as far as her treatment of other people in her life and everything. And the very first thing that I heard her say was, "Oh, there's got to be a mistake. I was sure I was going to hell." And yeah,
although some of them have, if you get into the near death literature, but what they got was a hell, quote unquote. They What they got was a dose of their own medicine,
yeah,
and a
yeah,
profound. The thing that we comes from the near death literature, and I would want everyone to know this, just as one human being to another, to tell you, to give you a heads up that when you die, one of the first things that's going to happen to you is you're going to face everything you've ever done.
yes,
You're going to have all the feelings and emotions of it, and you're going to experience it all, not only from your own point of view, but from the point of view of the people that you interacted with. So
yes.
if you are good to people, you're going to get all that back to you, and if you're shitty with people, you're going to get all that back at you. And you have to reckon with that first, or you're going no further. You're going to be in heaven's waiting room for as long as it takes you to reckon with yourself.
Well, yeah,
And
you
people think
literally,
there's no consequences to their actions, and there's not a hell where you get eternal punishment, but you will reckon with it from what you've created with
You know,
your life.
absolutely.
And I
Absolutely.
just want people to know that, because there's a lot of people who are crossing over without this knowledge. And Barbara, you probably encounter them, and they don't realize, like they have to start reckoning with things that they weren't prepared for because no one taught them, or they didn't believe any of it to be true. And then they pop over on the other side and they go, "Oh crap. I
Yeah, I
could have
mean,
been a much better person."
there are consequences, and they do. It's like we have free will, but the part nobody ever gives us, you know, or emphasizes is, yes, you have free will, but you will have to pay the consequences of your actions.
That's what karma is.
Yeah.
And you'll either reckon with it. It's sort of balancing the scales in a way, although I think it's more of just that it's reckoning that you can find there are parts of you that you wouldn't have discovered unless you were put in a situation where, you know, like it's like a painful birthing process. You have to find these things within yourself and reckon with them, and then eventually they become things that become integrated into you, and you can be much more conscious about the way that you go about it. And but then there's I think that a lot of people don't realize that what they're facing when they get to the other side really is themselves. Or it really is this. It's you. And in the same way that, because I have my background is in dreams,
Yeah.
and people will have these wildly outlandish dreams. I've had dreams where people went and burned in hell. I mean, like that
Oh
bad.
my.
I wrote a book about nightmares too, and I dug into
Yeah.
those dreams where you're like, oh my God, this is as bad as it can get. And in the end, if you go through the full interpretation process with that, and you come to the point where the person knows exactly what, not or close to what it is in their self that they are reckoning with in the dream space, in the worst sort of nightmare, it's always what they're seeing in the mirror, or not looking in the mirror and not seeing it about themselves. So, in the same sort of way, what these death experiences do is they make you see in the mirror to see everything that's within yourself and own it, to take responsibility for it.
Oh yeah.
And that yeah, and it's and bringing it back to the science of the paranormal, this is, I can't say that all these insights are in the book. When you and I get together and start talking
Yeah.
about this stuff, then we're going to go off on some
You
tangents and delve deeper than what I can say, because I had to stick within the parameters of published research, or people who have at least some credentials, um, to be able to present their, I'll just say, cases in the book. Um, so I had to be able to meet a certain bar for like acceptability. But I went a lot further than that in my own studies, and also in my own sort of speculation. Like, we can't prove that there's a God, but we can prove that there's an afterlife. So
yes.
get
And
used to it. Every atheist I know, their head just went,
I
because
know. I know.
they equate God with the afterlife, so they can't believe in an afterlife because they can't believe in God, usually a
Well,
religious notion of God. But I go, no, 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 dude, there can be an afterlife but no God. You don't have to accept the God part of it because we can't prove it. But if
yeah.
you want to use the methods of rationality, science, logic, something that is provable, we have proven that near death experiences are real with a very, very high probability. We've nulled the hypothesis on one side that says, well, it's drug induced, it's trauma induced, it's hallucinatory. We've nulled that. So what you have left is basically that you know, this has been proven. So we know that there's an afterlife, but we can't prove that there's a God. But so I can go and speculate in our talk, in this
Oh yeah.
conversation.
Well,
But
that's
when in the book, you're going to get a little more of a hard dose, because people, if I say the science of the paranormal and I venture out of the science,
yeah.
I know the first thing that's going to happen from the people who are looking at my book, because they are in that rational, skeptical, frame of mind,
Mhm.
and they don't want to go reading about someone's beliefs. They want to read what
Yeah.
is provable
Well,
to be
that's
real.
why try not to even use the term God. I go into the source of all creation or the creator of everything. And because the term God takes you right back to a religious type of an atmosphere. And I spiritually speaking, I think you have to go beyond religion into a more spiritual understanding of creation and who we are and what we are and our purpose here. I did want to make sure, though, that we hit one of my favorite topics that you hit, which is remote viewing. And scientifically speaking, um, much as they hate to admit it, the government even uses remote viewers. And I love the fact that there was a program for so long and it was so accurate that they canceled it. Ha ha.
Yeah. Um, Let me, if I can pick up with that, because this was one of my favorite subjects. In fact, remote viewing was something that I had trained in, and I won't say that I was any good at it, but I did train in it. And it fascinated me going all the way back to my first book about dreams, because there was a section on precognition, and
Yeah.
one of the premier names that in that area was Russell Targ, and Russell was one of the program directors for the original remote viewing program out of Stanford Research Institute, one of the premier scientific organizations in the world. Also, another one that got involved with the remote viewing program was SAIC, the Applied Sciences. Maybe I got the acronym wrong. Anyway, another one of these really big, I mean, beyond think tank, like these are premier scientists, a level of like a Los Alamos, which would be a government equivalent of some of these private
Yeah.
institutions that got, because Stanford Research Institute is a private institution. But anyway, yeah, so I knew about Russell and I knew about remote viewing. And it is the icing on the cake. It's the last chapter, although it's mentioned before then, because I get to what I present as being the best scientific case for any of these areas of the paranormal. But okay, so remote viewing, for those who don't know, is a protocol that was developed for tapping into an ESP functioning of the mind called clairvoyance. And it's the ability to see and sense what is going on at a distant location, without actually having any physical contact with that location or awareness of what is going on there. And Russell originally did their original research at SRI. Him and Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann, the famous remote viewer, basically the three of them pioneered this program earlier. And what they started doing was they would have a viewer in a shielded room at SRI with a researcher, usually Russell, who would be in the room with them. And at a given time, they would start trying to see, can I sit here and get mental impressions of what is going on with somebody who left an hour ago with an envelope telling them to go somewhere in the Bay Area? So they could be anywhere within an hour's transportation to get to that location and be there viewing it. And these were the first experiments, and they hit it over and over again. And some of them were so exact in their detail that it blew the researchers away. They went into this as physicists. Russell was a laser physicist. Hal Puthoff had been a Navy intelligence officer and a physicist. You know, and so they got this initial evidence that said, well, this is uncanny, the way that we can send these people to locations and the viewer can pick up on this. They can draw detailed like things, and they were very specific places, and it wouldn't be like, oh, go to the Golden Gate Bridge. No, it's like, go to this place where it has like a Ferris wheel and or a merry-go-round, or something very, as you building that's got an unusual shape to
Yeah.
it, or something like that. So that, and they would get these impressions, and the remote viewers would not only draw it, but they would give descriptions of the locations. This was the initial research, and this was published, by the way, in it was Nature, and IEEE got involved early on, where they actually published the results of some of these studies. So when people say that there's no top level journal that these papers can't meet that bar because the science is no good and all that kind of stuff. I go, actually, it has been published. Now, people disputed some of the experiments, and the results and the way the data was interpreted and the way the experiments were designed. So what did Russell and Hal do? They took the criticism and the constructive feedback and they tightened up their experiments and they continued publishing. That was enough for the CIA, who was running this pilot program, funding it, to say, we have something for you to do.
Yeah.
Yes, because originally the CIA thought that the Russians were getting a way of spying using the mind, and they didn't, like psychic spying. And so the CIA said, well, we can't let the Russians get ahead of us on this. We need our people studying this to see if there's anything to it, first of all, and then if there is, how do you develop this into something that's usable for us as an intelligence gathering method? And they were very successful at it, to the point where Jimmy Carter, in one of his biographies, mentioned the operation that had been classified at the time, of course, where they were trying to recover a Russian spy plane that had crashed in Africa, and they knew that there were these documents and they needed to locate it, and the CIA wanted to get inside and snag it before the Russians got there, but they just knew it was in this geographical area that was like 1,000 square miles or something. And the remote viewer came in and said, there it is. And it was located, they gave them the coordinates, and it was located within a mile of where the coordinates were in this vast area. And I'm like, so what I'm saying is that this has been done at an operational level. When the experiments proved that there was something here worth pursuing, it went operational. And not just the CIA, but the DIA, NASA, NSA, Air Force Special Intelligence, or whatever they're called, Army, the Stargate program came out of the Army. And Joe McMoneagle was an Army officer who was one of the most famous remote viewers, so he came out of that military branch. That was different than what Russ and Hal and Ingo did at SRI. They taught these other guys who went off into another branch of the service, brought in their own people, set up their own program, and started going operational with it. And these programs officially ran for 20 years. And then they went even more underground because word got out that there was a psychic spying program. And of course, every journalist, including Ted Koppel at the time, went crawling and, up to the Pentagon doors and said, tell us about this secret psychic spying program you had going. So the CIA said, well, we did run this program, and we funded it for 20 years or close to 20 years. And we spent all these millions of dollars on it. And in the end, there wasn't anything worth us. It's not worth pursuing anymore. That's basically what the CIA said. There was nothing of, operational, they had terminology, nothing of operational value to it. While at the same time, they're going, we found the holy grail of psychic ability here, because people can be taken off the street, trained in this stuff, and in a weekend they can start doing it themselves. But to develop, of course, into the top flight remote viewers who can do this with consistency, they about 75% hit rates was the best that they ever got, even out of their very best people. So there is no psychic in the world that's perfect every time. But they went operational with it, and they did it for years. They did it across the spectrum with all of these different agencies, military, private organizations, and it's proven. If somebody wants to dispute it, I've got a mountain, and the book shows a lot of it, where some of the remote viewers were able to guess things like, Joe McMoneagle saying that he saw them in a secret facility building the Typhoon class submarine before anybody knew it was there. And it was so weird because the tubes were slanted, and they're like, well, actually, submarine tubes are never slanted. No submarine had ever been built with slanted tubes. Well, the Russians had figured out a way that they could fire while they were moving. So they slanted the tubes to be able to do that. And the sub was so big that they had to build it as two halves that they then welded together. He saw all that. through his remote viewing. It was either Joe McMoneagle or Pat Price. Yeah, sometimes I get them confused. But anyway, this is documented. You can go to the CIA archives and you can see it for yourself. You can see what he drew and then what intelligence found out later when they actually viewed this super secret submarine, which no satellite could look at, no spy could get in there, no detection device could get in there. But a guy could sit down in a room, close his eyes or keep them open, and get mental impressions of a place in Siberia. And he's in a room in California and he's seeing into a super secret facility and seeing exactly what they're doing. If you can tell me how he did that and it's not some kind of psychic functioning, then I'm all ears because I haven't come up with how that's possible.
Well, I know when the government bombed the nuclear plant that they were refining whatever with. I can
In Iran?
remember when that happened, and I could see the explosions, and and on the news they were saying, "Oh, we got it, oh we," and I'm saying, "No, they didn't. They got the uranium out of there before the planes ever came," and and I told people that, and I said, they got that purified uranium out. They still have it. They may have wrecked the facility, but they got the uranium out.
Mm.
And it was maybe a week later that they were saying, well, there seems to be a great deal of it missing, and you can't account for it. And I'm
And
saying to everyone, I told you. And when you do this kind of thing and you see something and you try to say to people, something's wrong, and people look at you and they say, you don't know what you're talking about, and you can't prove it. But I told a number of people, I said, I'm going to tell you this just in case. I want to be able to say, or I want someone to be able to say, Barbara told me that, way back. I have a number of people that are my go-to people that don't think anything I say is strange, happily.
well, if you know that, Barbara, you weren't the only remote viewer looking into that mountain in Iran after that
No,
bomb went off, after
I'm
those
sure
missiles
not.
struck it, because this has been shown, especially when you get to people who get experienced with this, and they learn how to shift the signal, how to sift the signal from the noise. This is the art of remote viewing right there. If you can get to the signal, then you can pick up anything,
Oh
any
yeah,
information anywhere, which was why Michael Persinger, the professor, said that there are no more secrets.
no,
Michael is he was a psychologist who studied some of this paranormal stuff, and he said there are no more secrets because we have people who have demonstrated the ability to pick up information about anything going on anywhere. In fact, there's a funny story from the remote viewing program. They kept testing. The NSA got involved, and if you thought the CIA was skeptical about this stuff, the NSA was even
I can
off the hook with
imagine.
this. And they said, okay, if this really works, then I'm going to give you these coordinates of this place, and I want you to tell me what's there. And the guy who was the program manager from NSA, it was like his cabin in the woods. Well, the remote viewer saw this secret location, something else, right? And when they reported it, the at first it was like, well, this isn't right. Well, what the remote viewer was, their mind was attracted to, was the fact that this cabin was like a mile away from this super secret facility up in like the West Virginia mountains where they had a super secret NSA, place. But what Pat Price did that was demonstrated, and this is, I mean, these are in the archives, these accounts, official accounts of what happened. They're there. So this isn't just somebody making this up,
Yeah,
passing on something they heard from their cousin Joe. You know, Pat Price saw into a safe where they kept some of the jewels of the government, like the secret of secrets. And he saw in there and he read the file names. He saw, and it was the program names, and these are super secret code names and all this stuff. He went and he saw it and he reported it to him. And apparently, the SRI facility the next day was swarmed with national security goons because they thought there had been an extremely high level national security leak. But
Wow.
instead, it was a psychic, Pat Price, who had been he'd been a police captain, or like he'd been a police detective. He was very good at his job. And he got involved in the psychic side of it because he said that there were too many times when he was investigating crimes that he got information just there out of the blue, and he learned to trust it, and he solved a lot of crimes that way. And so when he retired, he heard about what they were doing at SRI, and he's like, hey, by the way, I can do this too. If you guys want to bring me in and run me through some tests, I'll show you. So anyway, that was part of the demonstration process. Was Pat was able to read the file names in a huge safe inside a top secret, super top secret NSA facility. And like his mind went there because that was more interesting than the cabin, apparently, because the mind gets attracted to the bright, shiny things, the fun things that they get to experiment with, when they're out there, not experiment, but that they get to view. It's like, oh, do you want to see this picture over here on the wall and sit there for an hour and just look at it? Or do you want to see what's down inside that super secret place over here that no one knows about?
I used to go to Newport News on a real regular basis, and I would do readings in a store there, and there are lots of military bases around there. And
Mhm.
at one point, a man and his wife came in, and you can spot a military man in a heartbeat, even though they're not in uniform. And he and his wife came in, and they sat down, and I spread whatever I was reading at the time. And I looked at him and I said, does your wife have top secret clearance? And he said, no. And I looked at his wife. I said, you have to leave the room. And so she left the room, and he looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, you have made a huge mistake here. And he said, how so? And I said, you just came from a top secret briefing. There's something that's going to happen within the next 2 weeks. Your uniform is going to change, and in front of you on a table with 4 other men was a folder that was marked top secret. Need I go further? And he looked at me and he said, can you? And I said, okay. And I said, I don't want to go too far because I don't want to get arrested, but there's a lot of sand. And he said, stop. And he got up and he left. And the next day, there were military police outside the store stopping any military person coming in. 2 weeks later, Desert Storm.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And I wasn't looking for it, but but you did mention something that I think is really important. When you're working with this field, when you're working in the spiritual, in this particular area, there's a certain amount of excitement and creativity and joy, and when you combine all of those, you can do almost anything. But the creative process is really important, and you don't have to be a master painter or anything like that. You just have to have creativity in your life that gives you that channel to the other side. And that's what the creative energy does. It allows you to go from the physical into the etheric.
Well, and they've shown the studies of populations to find people with propensities for psychic functioning, which, by the way, there are lots of tests out there that can be run. There's even a free app. It's like this ESP tester that you can get these days. But they found that creative people scored higher on these things. People who are and it's not just artistic and not just musical, but also creative in other ways,
Yeah.
dance. And so a lot of and this brings up a point that I make in the book, is that a lot of the studies that when you really dig into this and you look at the studies where they didn't come up with good results. They were, or when I say good, what I mean is they were looking for some kind of evidence for psychic functioning and they weren't able to find it. And it was often because they just did their experiments the same way that you do others on college campuses, which is you just bring in a
Yeah.
smattering of, undergraduates who are willing to get paid $20 to sit there for an hour or two in a lab, and they wouldn't do the thing that has been found over and over again through the studies, which is you have to weed out people first. You have to find people who have a natural propensity for this.
Mhm.
You know, Barbara, through scientific, I could prove that you cannot do a standing front flip. No human being can do a standing front flip because I can choose 1,000 people off of a college campus and not one of them will be able to do it. And if I only stay within those 1,000 people, which this would be the way that a study of psychic functioning might be more like a 50 or 100 people, and they do like card guessing or do something like
Yeah.
that, because they didn't. Now, if I went to the local gymnastics school down here and I get them, I'm going to find someone who can do a
Oh,
standing
yeah.
front flip. And so, and I just use this because a lot of people can do backflips these days. But I saw someone do a standing front flip and I went, oh my God, you really can't. I mean, I was like, you could, how in the world did they do that? But they were also a top flight gymnast. So I
Hmm.
went, oh, yeah, if you sit around practicing this stuff for years, you can eventually get that good at it. And it's the same way with the psychic functioning. They need to have people in these studies who have demonstrated the ability already. And these studies have been done with people who've demonstrated prior, and they score spectacularly. They had one guy at the Duke lab, who was guess he was a law student, and they found him to be part of their studies. And at one point, he guessed it was a set of 5 cards called Zener cards. And so you've seen them, one of them be like a star and it's a certain color,
Yeah.
another's a triangle, it's a certain color. So there's 5 cards. The On the other side of a wall, basically, a person turns over the card, and the person who's the experimentee, the research subject for that experiment, guesses what the card is, right?
Yeah.
Now, you have a 20% chance of getting it right just by guessing. And they had one guy who was right 25 times in a row. He was one of their star performers. It was this kid. It was, I say kid. He was, like he was between undergrad and grad school, like law school. And if I remember the story right, he put off law school for a year because he was so good at it. And they could tell that he was going to start getting like in the zone. He would get into the flow, and they could tell because the energy in the room changed, and he would just start like hitting them one after another, one after another. And when you're actually in the room to witness this kind of thing, you can't, you're just like, it's not coincidence. It's not a
No.
fluke. And even if you take the odds, what are the odds that a person could correctly guess 25 cards at 5 cards and could correctly guess 25 times in a row? I mean, it's just boggling to think of what those statistics are. Is it within the realm of possibility of it being a fluke? Yes. But if you were there in the room and you'd seen the previous experiments where this kid got on a roll and he started guessing these cards correctly, then you would say, I there's got to be more to it than just a fluke. It's not just coincidence that this kid did it 25 times in a row and then another test did it over and over again. But here was the thing that would kill those tests. The energy in the room is when they have they get bored, the test subjects do. They get bored with the because if you hit them
Yeah.
for hour after hour running these experiments, and the scientists are often stopping and they got to go do this and they got to go do that, and it's just a person sitting there waiting for the action to start again. I mean, they're human beings, and we think that they're going to just perform on demand and be able to do these things. Oh, you've bent a spoon before, let's see you do it now. Let's see you do it with James Randi sticking his face up in your grill and you're trying to bend a spoon and focus on something, and he's got bad breath and he's overbearing and he's got this negative vibe around him. None of this stuff is real, and I'm going to sit here and prove that it's not, they actually have shown that there is a bias toward, or there is a bias when you have highly skeptical people in the room, that these tests fail, that these experiments fail when those people are in the room, because they are actually giving off a vibe where they believe so strongly that this is all bunk, that anything that could possibly happen in front of their own eyes that would demonstrate otherwise simply cannot happen. So the people themselves are creating a poly effect. Do you know
Yeah.
what the poly effect is?
No.
Wolfgang Pauli. Okay, this is a trip. Wolfgang Pauli was a physicist, quantum Nobel laureate physicist. Let's be clear about that. One of the most brilliant minds ever in physics, but certainly of his age. Um, this, and it's on Wikipedia. There is a Pauli effect that was demonstrated because when he would walk into the room in a lab of his colleagues, that things would go wrong.
Oh, wow.
Machines would burst into flames. Experiments would fail spectacularly. Crosses would fall off the wall. I kid about that part. But
Yeah.
Wolfgang was such an intense personality that his presence could screw up experiments. So even though he was dearly loved and vehemently despised by some people because he was so strong about his opinions, and this is at places like Princeton where people think they're really smart
Yeah.
and they have really strong opinions, right? He would be banned from coming into the labs of his colleagues because it happened so many times. So they gave it a name. They called it the Pauli effect. This effect also happens in laboratories. So we have to account for this in the science of the paranormal. And what I haven't seen is an acceptance among the mainstream critics and skeptics who will say, oh, well, they should be able to demonstrate it at any time, on demand. If you say you can bend that spoon, I want you to go to 10 different labs and be seen by 10 different researchers under 10 different protocols. And I want you to do it perfectly every time, or else I won't believe that any of this is true. And you go, well, actually psychic functioning doesn't work the same way that,
No.
lighting propane on fire does. If you have propane and I add fire, I'm going to get a flame. Okay, it'll happen every single time. But it's not, psychic functioning doesn't happen every time. And they won't accept that. And I think it's because they can't wrap their minds around the fact that this is coming from a larger system of consciousness that can't be measured
Yeah.
and can't be quantified and doesn't behave rationally and logically like the physical material world does. The physical material world appears to be some kind of a subset within a much larger structure that is mostly imperceptible through our science and
Why
even through our physical senses, because we can't hear and see most of the visible and hearing spectrum. We can't even perceive it. So how are we going to build a device to measure it? We can't.
why is it so necessary to prove something physically that is not of a physical resonance?
Because we have a scientific method that says this is how we determine what is reality, what is real. If it's real, then you can follow the scientific method and find it that way. But this was the thing, and it was at the end of my book, and it relates back to remote viewing, is after months and months of digging through all this literature and biographies and video interviews of all these people from, Russ Targ and Ingo Swann and Sean Harabantz and just all these different people. And I also read the skeptics too, and I looked into all in the criticism of the research, and some of it is legitimately bad science, and the research is,
Yeah.
or the criticism of it is definitely valid. But I got to the end of this and I was watching, it was a keynote speech from Ingo Swann to the International Remote Viewing Society. And he was leading the audience to to his conclusion after all the years of being a remote viewer at the very highest level, operating as a CIA, DIAs, Army. Ingo worked with them all, right, as a
Yeah.
remote viewer, SRI. He did it all. And he was tested over and over and over again, and he passed usually with flying colors. So Ingo said, tell me what so we have this thing called the scientific method to determine what reality is. So how does the scientific method work? Like, what does it study? And it's right there in the definition of the scientific method that he read right out of Webster's dictionary to the entire room. And it says that the scientific method is made for studying physical phenomena.
Yeah.
And what we're talking about are phenomena of consciousness, of the mind and consciousness, and also of a larger system. It's the mind is probably just accessing into something this larger structure. And that's what we have to understand to really understand psychic functioning, because I don't think this stuff is located in the brain. The brain is more of a receiver for it, or a facilitator. But this stuff seems to act on its own, with its own accord, and according to its own rules and its own logic.
Yeah.
And so when something like a precognition happens, there aren't very many people who can induce it, but there are a lot of people who experience that moment of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't step out into the road, zoom, and they realize I would have died that if I would have stepped out of the road. But some strong feeling, never before felt anything like this in my life, some strong feeling came along and said, stop, don't go a step further. And so people have experienced things like that in everyday life. And it happens in a way that is not, it's not induced. So it's not a psychic power. Our terminology about this stuff is loaded with we've created our own pitfalls, because if it's a psychic power, then the person who is a psychic must be special. And I've seen it in the writing of the skeptics. They're jealous because they can't do this, because they're so left-brained. They won't accept that there's this larger reality, and there's a way of doing things other than the scientific method. And they're so skeptical of it that it will never happen to them because they can't allow it. In fact, the Pear Lab demonstrated that some of the highest statistical scores that they had when they were working on the random number generators, the highest scores they had were from very skeptical men who made sure that those random number generators did not deviate out of the usual. It was a psychic. They were psychically influencing the machine,
Yeah.
so that it wouldn't do anything unusual. It's a whole other way of looking at it. They're like, look, we ran millions of trials. We've got data sets that are fantastically large, and we can show you that there is actually a paranormal effect of the ordinary reality that that fits within the box of the materialist paradigm is the exception, not the rule. And that it's created through this extremely powerful belief that there can't be anything more than that. And because the scientific method, which is for studying physical
Yeah.
matter, cannot prove any of this stuff, therefore it's not real. And Ingo, at the end of his keynote speech, said, this is the problem. I've just shown you what it is. We're expected to prove something that's not physical by using a scientific method that was created for studying physical matter, physical phenomena. So
Yes.
it was doomed to fail from the get-go, which I think is just an astounding insight.
Well, people have often said, I don't understand how you can do what you do. And I always respond to, why not? Yeah. Can I can I walk on water? Yes, I can. It needs to be frozen, but I can walk on it.
Yes. Yeah, no doubt. Give me something so I can grip, or else I'm going to make a fool of myself when I fall flat on my face.
Yeah,
But yes,
I
I can
mean,
walk on water.
there have been people that wanted to test me, and I don't do tests. I do what I do. If it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think it's disrespectful at times when people I get this at Reddit, and I get these young guys come in and they're like, precognition isn't real. Because I run the dreams subreddits, right? And one of the most popular question is, why did I dream about something that happened in the future? Why did I get information in a dream like the other day? It was someone who got the exact somebody came up to her and told her his email address, and it was correct. She had never met the person before. He
how
just
cool.
appeared in her dream and gave, after having this, interaction, he's like, um, I'm a real person alive in the world, and I'd appreciate if you would get a hold of me. And he gave her his email address. And then she popped it into the thing, and the profile picture comes up if you just have the email address. And she's like, that was the dude who was in my dream. And and then there's, so I mean, maybe she conflated it. He looks close enough to the guy, and maybe she just, or maybe she made it up. I don't know. It's Reddit. But I've run across this enough where people come in and they say this stuff is impossible. And then I'll get the people who are the ardent skeptics who, when I come in and I say, yeah, precognition is a really interesting, it's been studied, and there's people like Daryl Bem, the sociologist, there's people like Dean Radin, the director of science at the director of noetic sciences, Julia Mossbridge. She taught at Northwestern for a while. She's a neuroscientist. These are people who've taken a deep interest in this stuff, and they've done really great research, and they've published, and then I have somebody who comes in and like, prove it. What color of my underwear am I wearing right now? If you're so psychic, you just get to prove it to me. And I'm like, God, like it's like this perform on demand, like a monkey kind of thing. And I'm like, if you put in the time and dedication to learn how to do something like this, and some idiot comes up to you and says, prove it, I'm going to test you. Like, you know, you know how you feel about that. I mean, it's a
Oh,
screw you. I'm not going to sit here and perform on demand, and I'm not going to try to prove something to you that even if I did it in front of your own eyes, you wouldn't believe it was true
well,
anyway.
somebody did that at one group, and the guy,
Michael
it was a
Shermer.
guy,
Yeah.
and he said, okay, tell me what color my underwear is. And I looked at him and said, I don't normally do tests, but if you'll go and put a pair of underwear on, I'll tell you what color it is.
Oh, he tried to set you up to get you to
Yeah,
guess a color. Oh, Barbara, I would have loved to have been there for that. You know, um, I think that this point of view is becoming, it's sort of it's the dinosaur. The
yeah,
people who are these strict materialists are becoming dinosaurs, but they're so convinced that they are right, eh, that they can't get off it. They can't back off and say, well, maybe there's more to this than what we've been willing to accept. I mentioned Michael Shermer. He's a famous skeptic. They have, by the way, they have their own ecosystem, and there is I think it's called the Skeptical Inquirer. I spent some days going through their rebuttals of various research that's been put out by parapsychology, research of the paranormal.
yeah.
I did go through their studies and read them. And one of the things I ran across as I was doing that was a guy named Michael Shermer, who was one of the arch skeptics, who, by the way, they create a career around being skeptics. So they can't be anything but skeptics because their income depends on it. Their reputation,
Yeah.
professional reputation depends on it. So let's be clear about that. But he had an experience on the night that he and his wife got married where they were in the room that they were in. Like, this is the night they're married. Very romantic, right? Michael might have lit a few candles, a little glass of champagne, a little come here, you know, a radio started playing, or
Oh,
it was a music box started playing in the room, and it was something that his wife had stored that had been given to her by her grandfather. It serenaded them through the night, and then never played again. It hadn't worked in years. To everyone's knowledge, this thing had been broken for a long, long time. And on the night of her marriage, her beloved grandfather's music box plays through the night these romantic, set in the mood kind of songs, and then never plays again. And Michael said, and I'll give him credit for this, that he said sometimes we have to be open to the larger mysteries. We have to be, you know, he's but in the end he said that he thought that it was just some kind of fluke. He didn't accept that there was something deeper to it. And it really made me wonder about the wife who married the man who would say that that had to have been something other than what she said it was, which was a confirmation that her beloved grandfather was with her for her biggest night of her life. I'm like, dude, you had your marriage is not going to last. I'm sorry. I don't know how long. Maybe it did. Maybe they had beautiful, maybe they were made for each other. But to me, for him to deny a magical event like that, you know, to come out and publicly say this to me
Yeah.
was like, you've just stuck a nail in your marriage by saying that, even if you thought it was true. But he had to stick to his guns. I'm a skeptic and I can't believe that any of this is true. And one of the things I discovered, Barbara, was that most of these people have already made up their mind before they've looked at any of the evidence. And this is true not only of the skeptics, but of almost everyone in academic science, because the rigor of by the time you get to PhD level, if you are not an arch skeptic, or at least have absorbed that, and profess that mentality, then you are not going to go very far in an academic career. In fact, if you're not an atheist, you're probably not going to go very far. Now, things are changing a little bit, but there were decades where you could not, if you believed in any of this stuff, it could be a career wrecker for you. You were going to be on the fringes. You are not going to get an academic post, and you're not going to be able to then use your PhD for anything but to be a nice decoration on the wall. Like, it's not going to get you the place in life. And everybody in academics knows this, and they toe the line, because the people who don't toe the line end up out of the club. There's a guy named Brian Josephson who won a Nobel Prize for proving something known as quantum tunneling. It's
Mhm.
obscure. It is super brain, Einstein level super brain stuff, right? He figured this out and he won a Nobel for it, right? And then he decided that he was going to use his position, because once you win a Nobel in science, you can pretty much write your own ticket.
Yeah.
And he created a lab for studying the weird, unusual, paranormal. And so he got such a cold shoulder from some of his colleagues that they protested when they found out he was getting invited to a conference, that they protested by saying, well, we're not going to go because Brian's going to be there. And I'm like, my God, we did that in fourth grade when we didn't like a kid. you know I'm not saying I did that, but I witnessed that kind of behavior in
Yeah.
fourth grade. And I'm like, these are PhD level. He's either at Oxford or Cambridge. It's one of the big English places that he was at the time. But this was across the board among physicists, that there was this group among the physicists who who said they would boycott the conference if they invited Brian. So they rescinded the invitation to the guy, because they didn't even want to hear what he had to say. They didn't want to hear the evidence that he was able to gather and present. They didn't want to hear that there is another point of view coming from a guy who won a Nobel Prize, who's saying, you guys don't believe this because of whatever atheism, arch skeptic, whatever it is. You won't believe this, but I have actually got evidence that it's real. And all I want to do is be heard. They did the same thing to Rupert Sheldrake. He's a biologist, a brilliant guy who came up with these brilliant experiments to prove various aspects of precognition and premonition and things like
Yeah.
that, telepathy, and they froze him out of the room. Robert Johns, the dean of engineering at Princeton, he created the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Lab, research lab, so that he could study if there can be a psychokinetic interaction between mind and machine, because he was written a big fat check by the guy who founded McDonnell Aircraft Corporation. It became McDonnell Douglas. They
Mhm.
said, look, if there is any chance that these pilots are influencing these machines when they're flying at Mach 1.5 and firing missiles, we need to know. And we think that there might be, but Robert Johns, Dean Johns, will you take this on? And he did. And you know, he was absolutely crucified for doing that. He, until his dying days, there were people who would not talk to him. He had a paper that he wanted to publish, and this is in the Science of the Paranormal, by the way. He had a paper that he wanted to publish, and he sent to an editor, and the editor said, "Yeah, Robert, I'll accept your paper if you can communicate it to me telepathically."
Oh yeah, I saw. Oh,
It's this laugh, 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 laugh at, it's the same sort of derision that we've seen with the UFO subject.
oh,
And it becomes so powerful because we're social creatures. The fear of ridicule and ostracism or just not fitting in with the in crowd is enough to drive most people away from this. And the
yeah,
ones who had the credentials to be able to walk in there and prove their case were then frozen out of their own institutions. They were lost their jobs. Dean Johns was forced out of Princeton eventually. The official press release was like he retires after an illustrious career as dean of engineering at Princeton,
yeah,
but what it really was is that they got so tired of him saying something other than the official line that they knew they had to get rid of him because it was trouble for them. I saw this, Barbara, across every subject that I looked at. I found examples where there are gatekeepers who will absolutely throw a fit if there's anything that doesn't fit into their worldview that gets out there as supposed to be in from sources that say this is what reality is. There's a guerrilla group at Wikipedia that has been going through page by page by page and getting rid of everything they don't like, all the citations and sources, the people themselves who are cited, as being like, this is so and so, and they were the director of this program at the Pentagon. Oh, they got involved with the UFO subject. Oh, okay. Well, let's just wipe their page out,
yeah.
off, just get rid of them, like canceled. Like you don't exist anymore according to Wikipedia as this public person because you've said
Yeah.
something that we don't like. So that's how strong this is, and it's
Oh yeah.
no wonder that people are afraid to take this on because you will lose your career. You'll never go anywhere. You'll be socially ostracized. And it's not going to get you anywhere in the end because we've been doing this, Barbara, since the 1930s.
Well, my late husband, Patrick Cook, wrote the Bible UFO Connection, and when it came out, um, he was. I mean, they were burning him in effigy. I mean, it was really amazing. 20 years later, everybody's borrowing his material,
Mm.
but he was a biblical theologian. And he didn't get into the paranormal or anything. He got into what was there in the Bible. Period.
A lot of
And
paranormal stuff in the Bible, ain't there?
oh yeah, there is. But it was funny because when we got together, he had never seen a UFO, and I had, and he was so jealous. Um, but but
I'm a little
but
jealous.
he
Actually,
didn't
no, I have seen a UFO, but I'm a little jealous too.
but he didn't believe in anything I did. But he said, I don't know what you do, but you do it well. And
Hmm. Do you
so
do?
I tell everybody, every psychic, anybody in the spiritual field should have an anchor that holds them into reality.
Yeah,
And he was my anchor.
yeah, because it's easy to go off the deep end,
Oh yeah,
and because you're dealing with something that Joe McMoneagle, who was the psychic spy 001, 007.
yeah.
Well, 001 in the psychic spying world is Joe McMoneagle. The spectacular successes. He's absolutely bona fide certified remote viewer or clairvoyant, which is what remote viewing is, a protocol for
Yeah.
clairvoyance. He said that in the end, what people are experiencing as psychic impression, feeling, sense, functioning, power, ability, whatever you want to call it, call it psychic. He said that it can't be differentiated from imagination. He said, I could imagine a submarine in a top secret facility in Siberia that I've been tasked. It's inside a building, and I'm been tasked to go inside a super secret building that we have never been in, with nobody knows what's in there, but we're curious what it is. He's tasked with going inside there and seeing what's going on. He sees something that is very distinguishable, and he draws it out exactly as it, and then it's proven to be real, right? He said, how am I going to distinguish that from imagination? He's like, you could. So what it means is that people could be having these sorts of psychic impressions, and they don't know that any of it's real. They don't know, they can't
Yeah.
separate the signal from the noise. So they don't know when they're getting the signal. And he says, though, that it can't be distinguished from imagination. So now we have to reckon with something that would make the head explode of any arch skeptic out there. Because imagination is what, Barbara? What are you doing when you're imagining something? You're
Dreaming.
making it up.
Ah,
It's not true. It's not real. It's imagination. And I go, actually, from my studies of Carl Jung and depth psychology and my learning of certain techniques, such as active imagination technique that was taught by Carl Jung, I can posit to you that the imagination might be the gateway or portal or receiver antenna for getting the signal. The imagination is actually the part of the mind, and it's not just a part, it's not a center. The imagination is the whole mind, the way it works together. Imagination is more like the operating system of the mind.
okay.
And so if you can actually, so imagination is the very tool that you need to do these things psychically. You have to be able to trust your imagine what it is. You might perceive it as imagination, but it's actually signal, because the signal is coming through what part of your brain?
Yeah.
The imagination centers or operating structure of the brain. The imagination is many parts of the brain. It's the way that it fires together that turns it into imagination and produces imagery and sensation that is viewed with the mind's eye, but can also be felt in other ways. But imagine, so the very thing that we have to use for whatever psychic functioning is the thing that skeptics have the hardest time dealing with. But we have the best psychic spy in the world that we know of, who's telling us that you have to accept this because there's no way of differentiating imagination from psychic. So it
I
was a
could,
point that I made in the book that we
yeah.
we have to grapple with this. And if we won't, then the science of the paranormal will get nowhere. We keep going back to the same place. I mentioned that we proved this back in the 1930s. There was a certain guy named J.B. Rhine and
Yeah.
his wife, who's not as well known, Louisa. They were both PhD botanists from the University of Chicago, which for a long time has been upheld as one of the most academically rigorous schools in the world. People who come out of Chicago with a PhD are generally very well regarded by their peers because of their what? Rigorous dedication to science and the scientific method. And J.B. Rhine went down to Duke and set up a lab and ran experiments for years, not just the Zener cards, this psychic cards,
Yeah.
testing cards. They ran a lot of other dice rolling experiments, card guessing experiment. I already mentioned that, but yeah, all these different experiments, right? So they publish a book that's called ESP. It's what brought the term into the public. Or they published this book, and it got the reaction at first from the public was fascination, and then from the scientific community was, well, you've got a problem here, and you've got a problem here, and you've got a problem here, and you've got a problem there. So all of it's going to get tossed out and none of it is worth a damn. See, because this was back in a time when science was in a transition to where it was more of empirical and data driven. And the transition was happening during the 20s, 30s, 40s,
Yeah,
especially in the 40s. The war made us have to deal with reality in a way that was,
true.
but um, so in 30s into the 40s, you have the Ryan Research Lab down at Duke pumping out this data, pumping out really good research. A few skeptics came out and said, well, there's a problem here, problem here, problem here. The public hears about that. The whole thing is tossed. All their thousands of trials, it's all tossed into the same bin of, pseudoscience or cloud of suspicion. This is not passing the academic rigor. Well, the archivist down at Duke went through all of that stuff. And she said, every one of the things that they said that the Rhines had done that was scientifically questionable or wrong, every one of them in the end was shot down. The Rhines did the research the right way. They applied the most rigorous science that you could to these kinds of experiments and subjects. And their data irrefutably shows, okay, I say irrefutable, odds against chance. We're talking billions to one that whatever happened in their lab was an absolute fluke. It was not
Ah,
psychokinesis. It was not telepathy. It was not clairvoyance. It was not any of these things. And so we've had this data now for almost a century that passes the bar, but we keep going back to the beginning. This is what I'll see something gets released and it comes out into the public. It creates a stir. People get fired up by it. The skeptics get involved. They start teaming up on Wikipedia to destroy the reputations of the people who would dare to say something that doesn't fall into their, into their paradigm. And then we're right back the next time the subject comes up. It's right back to where we began.
but
It's like
that's
are UFOs real? Yes, they are. Well, guess what? People are still asking if UFOs are real.
oh,
We've circled this many times, but we keep coming back. Why do we keep coming back to the very basic question of whether it's real? Because we've proven it's real. Why don't we ask questions like, well, shit, how does this work?
yeah,
What can we do with this? What kind of fun can we have with it? What kind of great things could we be doing, if we had more people involved with this, learning how it's done and doing it themselves like you have, but
well,
they won't touch it.
let's just take scientists out of the picture because they're also, they're publisher perish. They don't want to defer from the norm because they don't want to take the criticism. So they don't go forward. And I mean, when you look back in the 1800s, especially where there were things that were coming out here that that proved a lot of the archaeological theories wrong. They weren't
Yeah,
gonna they weren't gonna support them
they
just in
wouldn't.
case. So I mean, you've got it. You've
Yeah.
got that here today. You've got so many out there
Oh.
that are living examples that this stuff works. That
And
that
it's been
seriously,
proven scientifically. And yet we're still saying that it's not been proven scientifically. I'm like, what? What do you, I don't know what you're reading, what sources you're pulling this from, but some of this has been proven.
sure,
And some of it can't be proven, and we should just accept that, you know, it, and that there's going to be murky gray areas with this. I don't mind that kind of, and I think it's good to be, to realize what our limits are with this and what could, be proven scientifically.
yeah,
But to use science as a tool for suppressing truth that's been
yeah,
gained through the very methods of science that we're supposed to follow, that to me crosses a line into what I will call scientific heresy, because
yeah,
this is not science. They accuse this of all being pseudoscience, but I would call it pseudo-skepticism, because they're
yeah,
not putting forth rational arguments. They've decided ahead of time what they believe. So there, no amount of evidence will change their mind. It was like the guy who was on the craft when they were going to, it was a group of scientists back in the 50s. They were investigating UFOs. They were on an airplane, a bunch of them, flying to some military base. I'm going to and let me just recount the story the way I remember it, because the funny part is a UFO is now seen outside of the craft. It's like
Yeah.
buzzing along with them. They look out the windows. They're like, that it's a shiny disc with a little dome on top. I mean, maybe there were even little gray guys in the viewing window. I don't know. They said it was so clear as day that everybody on that plane knew absolutely without a doubt this the UFO. Okay, is this real or not? Well, it's right there. It's flying outside of our plane. There was one guy who was an arch skeptic who was on the plane, and they're like, Bob, don't you want to see this? It's the most spectacular thing they've ever want to see. Bob's like staring ahead, going, no. They're like, well, why not? And he goes, I wouldn't believe it even if I saw it.
You know, when I was in college, a UFO landed on my campus. This is 66, 65, 66. And it was during the time that, you know, they Heineck was out there and it was swamp gas time.
Yeah.
And it landed on the baseball field. And we heard police cars coming, and, you know, we heard their radio saying, we're going to turn on the stadium lights to check it out. Um, and in retrospect, I'm thinking, good way to sneak up on a UFO. Turn the stadium lights on.
With all these emergency vehicles coming with their lights flashing and sirens
So
going,
this thing
welcome to Earth.
raises up. We see it out of the dorm window. It swoops over the dorm. It blacks out the sky, and then it takes off. Now, standing in the window with me were people that saw it and ran. They were screaming. They were hiding in closets. They were, I mean, a lot of people got very hysterical.
Yeah.
I saw it. And the person standing next to me did not see it.
They physically did not. They did not. Yeah. Their belief is so strong that
Yeah.
they won't, or they don't have a base of reference for understanding what it is that they're really seeing. So therefore, their brain cannot actually see it. This was the when Cortez showed up off the coast of Mexico. It's said that the natives who were on, they look out there and they didn't even see the ships, but some of them did see something, but they would describe it as like mountains of clouds floating on the water or something like
Yeah.
that. They didn't know what a Spanish galleon was, you know, so they had to use whatever reference point that they had to try to describe it, which, by the way, a lot of things in the Bible sure as heck sound a lot like
Oh, yeah.
UFOs, but people didn't have the language at the time to, to explain it. So we tend to
Well,
turn it
wheels and
into,
wheels. I
religious
mean,
terminology. You know, um, so yeah, this is so strongly built into the human psyche. It's the belief is so self-reinforcing that you cannot that you might have something right in front of your own eyes, and you still not only won't believe it, you won't even physically be able to see it.
yeah.
One of the people I cite in the book is oh God, I'm figures Donald Hoffman. I was going to say this would be one of those names I would forget when I'm live in an interview, and I can't remember a most important name. Cognitive scientist, MIT trained, tenured professor somewhere in California for many years before he retired. He came up with something called conscious agent theory. It's pretty fascinating, and basically what he says is that, I mean, if you want to break it down, we're living in some kind of virtual reality, that these bodies are some kind of almost like a headset for perceiving reality, that we are not perceiving what reality really is. And not just that, but he proved through his experiments that there is a bias toward perceiving reality in a way that increases your odds of survival. Now, in our culture, would it increase or decrease your odds of survival if you are espousing paranormal beliefs or demonstrating them, demonstrating this? So what he says, so according to Hoffman, is that people are actually biased towards finding wherever that middle ground is and staying safely within it, because to venture out of it lowers your odds of survival. And it's not just in the evolutionary sense of survival, like life or death. Survival is also, we've talked about things like academics can have their careers ruined.
Yeah.
How are you going to pay the bills? Survival is, and it's, for more than just you, your family in some cases. So survival is also your social standing, your friends, your colleagues, things like that. These are things that are extremely important to human beings, and to use these as cudgels against people who go against the grain is triggering this survival instinct in them. But so what he says, what Donald Hoffman says, is that we have this already built into us, where um, where survival is you will shape your perception of reality based on what enhances your odds of survival. And so if that means that the UFO lands right there, and you are better off not seeing it,
Yeah.
then that's exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. It was a unique experience. I just noticed we've kind of gone beyond our time. So, um,
Yeah, that's right. And sorry to everyone. I told Barbara before we started, I'm in a B&B in Las Vegas, and we've traveled all day, and we knew that there were some travel things that had to happen, so I couldn't go for the usual 2 hours.
well,
But I was able to go for longer than 90 minutes, which was what we originally,
yeah,
kind of,
it
or what
doesn't
we worked out.
surprise me, but we'll
Yeah,
have
that's
to do
awesome.
this again,
Yeah.
because there's so much more to talk about, and getting out there another philosophy, another understanding of what it is that's happening, and the talents and the gifts that are available to everyone if they
That's,
just reach to them. I mean,
yeah.
I tell people all the time, I am not unique. I'm using stuff that it's sort of like it was a car and everything came with the car. I didn't have to pay anything extra to get the ability to see or the ability to hear.
Yeah.
And everybody has the same tools. Reaching
And
for them and
they're
using
built
them is
into
a
them.
whole other thing.
Yeah, they are. They're built in. This is part of the nervous system and mind.
Yeah.
At least the tools, the receiver, whatever you want to call it, it is built in. It has been shown in the science of the paranormal. I also talk about the research that's been done, brain scans that have found, the right parietal junction fires. They got the psychic in a MRI,
Yeah.
and they're doing their thing, and that they show that there are parts of the brain that are firing in very strongly. And here is the thing, it's right brained. Left brain, logical, linear, right brain, feeling, intuitive, holistic. It's right brain. In fact, in the remote viewing program, they used one of their training books, Barbara, was called, and I hope you made it to the end, everybody who's here, because if you're interested in this subject, I'm going to give you the book. You can develop your own psychic ability, and all you got to do is draw. It's called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Yep.
Yep. And you will develop, she specifically taught you how to develop that right brain functioning. And they have used it in these psychic training programs, and they continue using it. And by the way, as a final word, I hope here, I want to say, for anybody who's listening, who's from that skeptic side of this subject, I respect where you're coming from. But I want to say that you've already been end run by these programs that are operational using psionic assets, is what they call them now. It's like UFOs are now UAPs. Now we have, instead of psychics, they are called psionic assets, and they are being employed by government and private groups in a
Yeah.
huge way. We're not talking about a little obscure program somewhere here or there. There
Yeah.
is, according to the Age of Disclosure, there has been an arms race for the last 80 years. This is a brand new movie that came out. 80 years, there's been an arms race to reverse engineer these craft that they're coming out of the sky. We call them UFOs. Now they call them UAPs. We used to call them psychics. Now we call them psionic assets because it's a less loaded term. But these people are being employed. They are operational. So you can stand there all you want to and say, well, the science doesn't prove it. And oh, I don't care if you're published in Nature or IEEE or a prestigious journal. We will find a way of making people disbelieve everything that you say and not. And I go, but guess what? While you do that, you have been end run by
Yeah.
people who don't worry about belief. They are pouring money and resources into identifying people who can do this and getting them into their programs. It's been going on for years. It's been admitted, it's been disclosed. And so you can keep asking your questions over here and trying to say, well, science won't accept this. And I go, but the military industrial complex does accept it.
Yeah.
Who has to deal in reality? The CIA and the military industrial, do they have to deal? Are they better
Yeah.
at dealing with reality? Do they have to deal with reality? And if they say it is reality, then it is. So I'll leave it at that. I thought it was you know, anybody who's left over on the skeptical side of this, please read my book. I went very far afield with this in
Yeah.
our conversation. I present the science in my book with a little bit of this stuff that we've talked about because I couldn't help myself. I mean, I've been following the subject for years. I know what the truth is. I've experienced it for myself. And Barbara, anybody can do this
Yeah.
except for the arch uber skeptics. They are not built for it. The highly left brain linear people are not built for this. But let me just say, we still need you. We need those people, the super hard left brain logic linear engineer, whatever type people. We need you to be part of this because it's too easy for us right-brained, loosey-goosey, intuitive feeling, sensing people to sometimes lose our anchor point and start accepting things that maybe aren't valid or aren't factual, aren't real, but it just because we're getting noise in the signal. We
Yeah.
need these people to be able to help keep us
Oh,
on
absolutely.
track, but at the
Yeah.
same time, don't stop us from doing what we do best because we're in this world for a reason. Because you know, there's
A
more to
balance.
life than just
Yes. And
I
we're going to do this again.
think so, Barbara. Thank you
Thanks
for having
again.
me on your show. I appreciate it and very much. And it's been a great conversation, very stimulating. I want to find out more about that UFO that landed on your college campus.
Oh,
By the way, what campus? You said it was in the 60s?
Eastern Michigan University.
Eastern Michigan. So anybody else who was there to witness that, can you leave? There's a way they can leave a comment, right? It would be really wild synchronicity if somebody happened to find your show
Oh,
tonight,
yeah.
listen to all this and be like, holy crap, I was there. I saw it too. And no one's ever validated it. And right now you just got your validation. Barbara saw it too.
Well, not only that, but um, a number of years ago, I met a man who wrote a book called In Focus Paranormal, and he reported validated UFO sightings, and the Eastern Michigan University campus was one of them.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. It also reminds me of the school in Africa that had hundreds of people saw it, and
Oh, yeah.
there was a documentary film about it. Um, but yeah, we are way beyond. It's the people who deny UFOs. I'm sorry, but you guys are dinosaurs. It's if you go watch The Age of Disclosure, and I'm not hawking the movie, I've seen bits of it, and it is absolutely the case has been made,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
without a doubt. So
Yes.
anyway, yeah, we could go
And
on. Okay, let's schedule this
we
again,
could.
Barbara. Please have me back on. We'll pick right up where we left off. We'll have a great conversation and go over another 2 hours of
Oh, yeah.
pouring all this information out there because this is fantastic. We are really getting the information out there through this medium, and I hope that this is helping to further the mission of why you've been at this for years, getting this information out there through all of your various platforms,
Oh, yeah.
pouring a lot of resources into it too, not just your time, but money, energy. I mean, other people getting involved in it. And I hope that this, you've put together a great body of work, and I'm hoping that it's
Well, as
seen.
have you. So thank you again, and
No, thank you.
have
Appreciate
a
that.
great
Yeah.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you too, and to everyone out there. Yay. J DeBorg, The Science of the Paranormal. Great book. I hope you get a chance to read it.
It is a great